get started. Okay.
Sure.
Hello, this is Fred Iantorno, and I would like to welcome everyone to Tech Talk 360, sponsored by AirPro Diagnostics. Thank you to Lonnie Margot, Josh McFarland, Michael Quinn, and Team AirPro for making this possible. Our goal is to present topics that you won't normally see in other webinars, and we've got another good one today. The next webinar will be on August 20th, so mark your calendars. Now I'd like to turn things over to our two great guests, Jordan Hendler and George Avery. Hello, George, you want to start us off?
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Fred. All right, we had a little late start, everybody. Welcome. I know you attend a lot of these seminars, and you wonder when you have time to work. I know, but this is a good one. Thanks to AirPro, this is good stuff, and we've got a great one for you. Now, the reason we're on a little delay is because my co-host is out of the office and is having some connectivity issues. Now, we obviously planned this in advance. She's not on a beach in Aruba. This is not a ploy for a vacation, but something unexpected came up. So she is going to sit in the background and holler every once in a while, as long as she's got connectivity to keep me in line. So Jordan, if you can hear me with the connectivity, we miss you. And it's always good to have you. And you're my favorite co-host. Now, you may have heard me say that about the other co-host. I didn't mean it. It's you that you're the good one. So anyway, welcome. Want to have just a quick introduction. I'll start with Jordan, and just in case she's not connected, of course, everybody knows Jordan Hendler. She runs CIC very well and has grown CIC since I was the chair, and she's also very involved in the industry. So I'm certainly not doing her any justice by not covering all the wonderful things she's done, but if you know Jordan, you know a good person and somebody that's been around for, well, not a long time like me, but she has been in the industry and has been a big part of it. Myself, George Avery, of course, I was a CIC chair. I'm a past president of the National Auto Body Council. I run the Insurance Roundtable, and still active in the industry, even though I retired from a large insurance company coming up on 9 years ago, which is interesting. So anyway, welcome. So we're going to get started. So let me do this real quick. Let me get our antitrust out of the way, and then I'll introduce Brunno. I think you're really going to like this call. So as you know, we have to read this out loud for some of you, especially those of you in the insurance company. It has to be read out loud. As participants of this seminar, we need to be mindful of the constraints of antitrust laws. There shall be no discussions of agreements or concerted actions that may restrain competition. So this prohibition includes the exchange of information concerning individual prices, rates, coverages, market practices, and claim settlement practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. So each participant is obligated to speak up immediately for the purpose of preventing any discussion that falls outside these bounds. And you always hear me say that you got to read it out loud. And I can tell you that even though Jordan will be in and out, I have a pretty good sense of what we should and should not talk about from an antitrust. But again, you always have an opportunity to do that as well. As far as taking questions, we're going to use the Q&A. Have you been on the call before? We don't take the questions live for time, really, for anything. So if you have any questions, we don't use the chat feature, we use the Q&A. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and select the Q&A and put it in there. That'll come up to Fred and I, and then and of course, Jordan not gonna be able to see it. So Fred and I will kind of manage that, and we'll ask the questions. We'll typically take questions at the end. So if you happen to put a question in the Q&A and I don't stop immediately to ask the question, we think it's better in this particular presentation to wait to the end. So don't get impatient if your question sits in there for a little bit. We didn't forget you. We just want to put you in the right place. Normally, Jordan takes care of the body shop stuff, the collision repair questions. And again, if she happens to be connected, she could chime in if she wants, but I can go ahead and handle that as well. And I handle the insurance side. All right, so with that, unless I miss something, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Brunno. So most of you probably know Brunno. He's the president of ADAS Solutions for Ascential Technologies. Brunno Moretti, just a great guy, and I've had conversations with him, but I was joking that as many things that are going on in the industry, I'm not sure what number one is as far as a challenge, but I tell you, ADAS is at the top. And we have had ADAS on a few times. Everybody's talking about it, but I think this is a good way to get some additional information that'll help you. Brunno's bio is, I think you saw that in the on your invite. Of course, he's been very active in the industry, well educated, and is the right person to be talking to us today. So Brunno, I really appreciate you being on. We're going to do a transition to your PowerPoint. We're not going to control the PowerPoint because Brunno says that there's some stuff in there that they may not release, but he's going to share it with you here. So that's always a good thing. So with that, Brunno, I'm going to, and I'll just pause a second if Fred, or Jordan, if I missed anything. Otherwise,
you've got everything there,
all right.
George.
Well, we're going to let Brunno, again, I want to thank you in advance and appreciate your time. And we'll run right up to the top of the hour. Just before that, we typically have a little wrap up that Jordan and I do, and because of the connectivity, we'll play that by ear when we get there. So with that, Brunno, we can see your presentation, A Hidden Threat to Road Safety, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, George, for having me. Again, super cool that you guys invited me just to kind of get some of the information we've been working on and some testing on, what does it mean, to have good versus a poor calibration versus a no calibrated, right? So as George was saying, right, I've been in and around the industry for quite some time, but always on the product development side. So 10 years at General Motors, developing all of the systems and sensors for Super Cruise, Ultra Cruise, and other features. So I've really been on that end, spent some time in one of the tier ones, working on ADAS sensors as well. And then, past 3 years, I was working as well on LiDAR, which is another sensor modality that's coming shortly. That's only going to complicate our lives in this industry, right? So been with Ascential Tech here for 9 months almost now. And yeah, one of the things I wanted to focus on really is looking at this threat that really nobody is, I think people here understand it, but I think there's also a lack of education and awareness that's going on that I think it's good to explore. So with that, let's get it started. So for some of you, Ascential Tech is the overall brand name for Burke Porter. Burke Porter is a company that's been around for about 70 years. They're very well known for, the end-of-line equipment that goes into the OEM assembly plants, right? So when a vehicle gets put together, there's these stations after the vehicle is put together that goes into calibrate sensors, align the vehicle, run it in a roller up to 80 miles an hour. All of that equipment is what, Burke Porter is known for, right? We're around, 22 countries, 45 locations, right? Tons of experience there. So biggest thing was, how do we leverage that experience on the end of line to generate equipment for aftermarket, right? And that's kind of what our business is here in my division, at least. That's what we try to do, right? So let's get into just ADAS calibration and overview, right? I think a lot of you probably know this, but it's always good to kind of put some facts out there, right? 90% of all new vehicles have some level of ADAS. That's, from 2023. So, and the number might be even higher now with the FMVSS 127 coming in 2029. That 100% of the vehicles are going to have this AEB. That's not only, we can get into a little bit more detail later here in the slides, but it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more demanding than the current AEBs that are on the road today. It works on pedestrians up to higher speeds. It has to work at night, right? It's a very, very stringent requirement. So that's going to also be something that we want to keep in mind as we go forward here. But looking at, the current technology is already showing that it works, right? There's a HLDI report that showed that front-facing AEB reduces property, damage liability and bodily injury claims by 14 and 23% respectively. There was a study by AAA that showed that, 2024 vehicles avoid a collision 100% of the time. It was a separate select number of vehicles, right? But between 20 or 12 miles per hour to 35 miles an hour, right? Compared to 2020 or 2018 vehicles that the numbers are much lower. So you can see even from 18 to 24, the technology has already gotten better. But if you look at it, it's 35 miles an hour. The requirements from FMVSS 127, I believe, is like something above 60 miles an hour. So you can understand that the technology the capacity and, the capacity of those sensors are going to have to increase to be able to react to higher speeds. And that's something that's, again, going to be very interesting for our industry. Also, when you look at that same study from AAA, anything above 35 miles an hour, you saw a sharp drop in performance, and anything above 45 miles an hour is almost no reaction, right? So again, the systems that are in the roads today are good enough for between 12 and 35, but at higher speeds, it starts to decline very rapidly, and that's what FMVSS 127 is supposed to fix, right? Looking at calibration, right? Just in general, right? 100% of the vehicles that have ADAS get calibrated at the end of line on the OEMs. It's millimeter precision, right? It's a controlled environment with floors, lightings, and metals not being around for the radar, and it ensures proper, system functionality. And below, you see just a picture of what, one of the ADAS end of line stations can look like for a OEM. Very complex tooling, right? Everything is automated. Takt time is extremely important in an OEM assembly plant, right? So that's something that, again, we leverage for the aftermarket with our own equipment, but just wanted to give you a little bit of visibility there onto what kind of equipment goes in the end of line. So I think, again, a lot of you probably know this, right? But some of the repair, post-repair calibration challenges that we see, right? This was a study by ADAS Think. Again, small number. I think it was 100 vehicles sampled out of Canada back in, 2023 or 2024. That said that 88% of necessary calibration ADAs are being overlooked by body shops and post-repair. Again, small sample size, but it gives you a little glimpse into there is a potential issue there. There's a lot of vehicles out there that are not getting calibrated. I think some of this data that we see lately with CCC and some of the other data that I've gotten our hands on, it shows that the problem is not as pronounced as 88, but still a problem, right? As we all know, no standards, right? There's no industry or government standard for performing ADAS calibrations, and very specifically, standards on the when and standards on the how, right? I think the OEM calibration procedures are out there. Every OEM does things a different way. And if you ever read one, you understand that using plumb bobs and tape measure is not a method for success. It introduces a lot of variation, a lot of places for human error, right? So those are all things that, again, this lack of standard or lack of anything, right? To be honest, it can become a problem, and it offers a lot of opportunities for error, which then could, of course, cause liability or safety concerns later. Tech barriers, right? Many tools and services available do not meet OEM standards that compromise quality. So I think all of that put together kind of creates this big challenge for everybody that's in the industry today. Complexity and regulation, right? So look, we're already going through a lot of this, and we already have problems with lack of education and awareness. It's only going to get worse, right? And I'm not trying to, actually, I am trying to scare you, just because we know that there's just a lot that's coming down the pipeline, right? We already know that 90% of new vehicles have it, and it's going to get to 100. But then that's just AEB and some of level of ADAS, right? You start talking about level 2 plus, and level 3 vehicles. And for those of you that might not know, SAE has levels of autonomy, right? Level 2, the driver is still in the loop, still has to be eyes engaged, but it can be hands off, feet off, right? Level 3, the driver is still in the loop, but there are moments where you can hand off control completely to the vehicle, and the vehicle has 10 to 30 seconds to alert you that you need to take back control, and it needs to be fully autonomous in that meantime, right? So all of that technology is becoming more prominent. I just put, one example here. This is an announcement from VW, that they teamed up with Valeo and Mobileye to do this level 2 and / level 3 that has, and you can see the number of sensors there in the diagram, right? It's a lot more cameras. It's a lot more radars. Some of these systems, like the Mercedes in 2026, has 30 sensors, including LiDAR. So know that the complexity is only going to increase. Now, granted, most of these vehicles are going to be in the luxury brands. It's going to be low runners, but you can only imagine that that's only going to increase more and more as the OEMs get more comfortable with it, right? So that's on the complexity side. On the regulatory side, we briefly talked about the FMVSS 127, right? This September of 2029, all vehicles in the US will have to adhere to this, which is have an AB and pedestrian AB standard. And then, like we briefly talked about, it is a higher performance, it's higher speeds. And, there's night testing, which again, cameras are not very good at night. For pedestrians, radars are not very good for pedestrians, right? Because they have a small radar cross section. So the way that each OEM will solve for that regulation is going to be different. So OEM A is going to do cameras and radars, but these are higher megapixel cameras that are much more reliant on a proper calibration. They're going to use imaging radars, which use 4 times the number of mimic chips, which actually create the waves, that also rely on higher, needs for calibration. They use low-level fusion versus high-level fusion of objects. All of that is only going to complicate, the repair procedures, and it's only going to increase the need of proper calibration. One thing that's also there in FMVSS 127 is that the vehicles will have to self-diagnose when something is not working. Now, there is no standard or anything that NHTSA has, dictated that it has to be a certain message on the bus or something like that. It's basically just a telltale that says it's not working, right? And then we'll be, so that's something at least more than what we have today. But again, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement on a regulation standpoint to really tell us how things are going, which sensors are not working, what's all that information that we need to really root cause any issues, right? So complexity and regulation is only increasing, right? It's going to penetrate these ADAS sensors even more, the quality of those sensors and the quantity of those sensors. Looking at the landscape today. Aftermarket calibration, right? I think we talked about this, right? Where we have these manual, really, just really manual workflows in order to calibrate, right? You have to use plumb bobs, tape measures, put tape on the floor to when you identify a certain area, then use tape measure. And you can see placing targets on a calculated position. There's a person standing there, right? I mean, all of that's crazy to me, right? Coming from the OEM and supplier side, where everything is millimeter precision, you look at these procedures and they introduce so much room for error that it's just crazy. That's something that's out there, and they're expecting the aftermarket and the service professionals to figure this out and do it precisely, right? As you can see on picture 3, there's just a lot of calculation, right? So again, not great, right? I think there's a lot of key shortcomings there that you see on the right side, but I think everybody that has touched, ADAS calibration knows that that's something that's very lacking in precision. When you're looking at, lack of proper calibration, its consequences, right? Again, look at this picture on the left. You see a person, holding a target. God knows how they measure the height of that. It's a tetrahedral there. It's right behind a bunch of toolboxes that are all metal. I mean, all of that goes against, the procedures, right? Like the OEM procedures. There's no confirmation that the correct target is in position, right? And then when you look at the consequences on the picture on the right, again, if your radar wave is properly calibrated, you're looking at the vehicle in front of you. If it's improperly calibrated, it could give you false positives on the oncoming traffic. And again, slight changes of 1 degree or less might sound like little, but in longer distances, it becomes a much more pronounced error, right? So, scan tools are not really conveying proper calibration when it's done or not. There are no DTCs being set for most of the OEMs. Again, that lack of standard really showing how all of this can be done in a very poor way, but still technically pass. And we just don't know, is it good enough or not, right? So that's where, when I joined here, I was like, how do we know what is good and what's bad, right? How do we quantify the importance of that calibration, right? So we commissioned a test with the TRC at Transportation Research Center in Ohio. And what we wanted to do is really put in a baseline vehicle. So an unchanged, in this case, was a 2024 Nissan Altima with 13,000 miles. Then we called it a good calibration. Again, this is calibration using our equipment, which is highly automated. And again, millimeter precision, right? What the locations of the target. Poor calibration, we use some methods that we've seen in other shops. Calibrations being done outside, non-flat floors, non-OEM processing tools, not checking fuel tank or the pressure of the tire, stuff like that, right? We wanted to kind of do a worst case scenario of what a poor calibration is. And then the no calibration was a reproduced post-collision change to sensors, and then of course not recalibrating those. So basically on the camera, a camera being misplaced into the bracket, which is very easy to do. We see it a lot. And then the radar being, a few or less than a degree off on a certain direction, because again, you had some major damage on the frame of the bumper of the vehicle. That datum location might not be the same, right? So that's what we did. Hypothesis, right? A non-calibrated vehicle would fail most tests. A poorly calibrated vehicle would partially fail and then have varying results. And then the properly calibrated vehicle would perform as well as baseline, right? So we ran these tests. And again, I want everybody to keep in mind, right? This is a one vehicle study, right? This is not a comprehensive, statistically relevant, that you have to run at least 200 vehicles, right, to get real statistic relevance. But the point is that nobody had run anything like that. And coming from this engineering background, we always talked about, it's like, well, it's OEM quality. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Nobody knew how to answer or quantify that specifically. And that's what we try to do that here, at least, peeling this first layer of the onion. I think a lot more tests need to be done. I think the government needs to put some funding aside to help run some of these and truly quantify. But again, this is the first step. So I don't want anybody to, use it as a deterministic, like, oh my God, this is, but it's a very, very good first data point, right? That's all. I just want to make sure people know that. So the test performed, right? This is again standard test from NHTSA that the TRC team performed for us. You can see on the right, the instrumentation in the vehicle is a lot. I mean, they have crazy, sensors in the vehicles. They have little microphones to detect the beeps, with millisecond precision. So we know exactly when the dummy vehicle and the dummy pedestrian all have connectivity to the vehicle. So we know exactly the distance. All right, this stuff is, these guys are professionals, right, in running this. So again, these test procedures are all NHTSA, lane departing, the crash enemy braking, traffic jam assist, and PAB. These are all very well defined, even though kind of old, right? When you look 2013 being the earlier one, but it's what we had, and it's what a lot of these tests are run at. You can see what speed, you can see the number of tests that we ran in each one of them to get statistical relevance within this test, right? And then here's some of the key results. So looking at the function, right? Lane keep assist, OEM baseline, again, that vehicle with 13,000 miles, it was consistent and centered alerts. The no calibration had no alerts at all. It was dangerous failures. I'm talking no assist, meaning trying to bring the vehicle back, no alert at all. So there was nothing. It just really had absolutely nothing. And again, this is a camera that was just improperly placed into the bracket. That's very easy to do. Poor calibration alerted the skews late. So it actually went in much later than what the OEM baseline did. And then the good calibration consistently, nearly identical to the baseline. So we saw, again, to the hypothesis, pretty much what we expected. Then you go into AEB, for the vehicle, right? The OEM, it was smooth and predictable braking. The no calibration, again, no alerts and no braking at all. It was a total failure. It smashed through the dummies every single time, the dummy vehicle. The poor calibration had correct function, but with variance. The stopping distance was a lot higher at some points and then a lot lower, meaning it was very hard to predict the behavior. And if you're a customer, not knowing if or when your vehicle is stopping, even though it did pass, right, even though it did have correct function, the stopping distance was a huge variation, right? And then when you look at, when we recalibrated the vehicle, it was better than the baseline. We actually had consistent tight tolerance stopping distances that were larger distances than the OEM baseline with smooth braking as well. So again, that just shows that importance of the calibration, a properly done calibration, how it can behave, even in relation to the OEM baseline. Adaptive cruise control, again, you kind of think that's kind of like AEB, but you do have, the tracking of the vehicle beforehand. So it is a little bit different. And then again, adaptive cruise control for the OEM baseline was repeated with smooth stops. No calibration, was very erratic. It stopped late couple of the tests out of the 7, but then every other one was a full impact. The poor calibration had correct function, but again, with the same kind of variance that we saw in the AEB, sometimes longer than the OEM baseline, but also lots of times shorter. And then the good calibration, again, consistent and better than the baseline with better stopping distances and smooth braking. The pedestrian AEB, that was one that kind of opened my eyes a little bit by looking at the results. The OEM baseline, actually, the majority of the tests, it impacted the target. Sometimes at high forces, sometimes at very low forces, but still 4 out of the 7 times we had impact. The no calibration, I mean, it didn't even blink. It went straight into, hitting the pedestrian every single time. The poor calibration had large variances again in the stopping distances, some of them getting extremely close, others, with good distance. And then the good calibration, again, most consistent with the earliest braking and the better braking profile. So taking all of this, right? I know it was a lot to digest here, but and by the way, all of this is in a white paper that we're going to release later this month. And the team here asked me to kind of give you just a small sneak peek of what's coming. So all of the data is going to be available in this white paper that we're going to, by the end of this month, get it out. But I think it's important for us to get this information out there, show the importance of a calibration at all, right, versus this no calibration, and then also show the importance of following OEM procedures and OEM. Again, I know I kind of talk badly about the procedures because they're so manual, but those prerequisites and the requirements about a flat floor and diffuse lighting and checking alignment or checking, tire pressure, that's extremely important, right? If we automate some of the manual stuff, even better, but just to show that that's extremely important. Looking at the results, again, this is something that we took some, we had some videos here, but I just showed some pictures. But a non-calibrated vehicle, again, just smashing through the dummy vehicle with not even a blink of a braking event. The non-calibrated vehicle smashing through the dummy, as you can see, helplessly up in the air after the vehicle has gone through it. And the baseline vehicle, without being touched after 13,000 miles, still, you can see the brake lights are on. So it did react to it, but it was too late, right? Where when you look at a good calibration, you can see there's a healthy margin of distance there. The dummy is actually going from this side to the next, right? So you're able to actually see, the pedestrians cross safely and the vehicle stop in time. So the big learnings and key takeaways, right? ADAS calibration is extremely important to road safety. The hypothesis, right? We confirmed that the calibrated vehicle, or the non-calibrated vehicle, would fail most tests. The poorly calibrated vehicle, we mostly confirmed, even though it was surprising to us, right? That part of the unexpected findings that even a poor calibration did better than the baseline in some tests, right? With higher variance, but it still did better. So that is something to think about. And I have a slide here to talk about that, as what does that mean for calibration as a maintenance item, right? And the proper calibrator would perform as well as the baseline. We actually proved that it performs better than the baseline. So that was also an unexpected finding, right? And again, the calibration as a maintenance, right? I think that testing, again, one data point, all of that good stuff, right? But it also shows that there is a thread there for us to pull and say, look, we need to investigate this more, that, this specific vehicle with only 13,000 miles already has showed enough wear and tear that degraded the performance of the ADAS system, right? So should calibration be a maintenance item, something that either we have to verify it somehow, right? Or, it's just become a, either 15 or 30,000 miles, something that it becomes a standard, item that we have to do, right? Something that because again, looking at a good calibration, 100% avoidance on the pedestrian, and then mixed results on the baseline. That specifically with pedestrian, they're the most vulnerable road users, right? I think it's very important for us to kind of give this attention to this, right? Again, I think it's a recommendation to look into it, not necessarily let's go and do it, right? But at the same time, definitely need to investigate this more. You know, and then again, when we talked about the, you know, what it is that you're seeing with those calibrating procedures being so manual, right? This is just an example of how we calibrate with our equipment, where again, we're doing both a front camera and a front radar here in about, you know, just over 5 minutes. This is not something that needs to be, that takes some really long time. I think having this automation, having this kind of what we leverage from our, you know, end of line processes, it is something that can reduce a lot of that variance, and you know, it eliminates the human error out of these types of calibrations, right? So this is something that, you know, we're extremely proud of. Is just again leveraging that kind of you know, automation, and to really make the vehicle again automatically centered. Targets placement is completely automated. All of that allows us to have, you know, the confidence that this is going to be a good calibration. So call to action, right? I think lawmaking, you know, there's some regulation or legislation to mandate calibrations post repair, potentially also to regulate maintenance, and then also to adhere to a certain standard. OEMs, you know, needing to have this conversation about standardization on the procedures and making sure that they're, you know, they're checking and making sure that those standards are being followed, right? I think it's also the OEMs that don't enable static calibration. I think that's a potential issue, right? Knowing that static calibration is much more accurate than a dynamic. It's something that should be allowed as an option at the very least. And then I think education, right? Body shops and consumers are not necessarily aware of the risks of this uncalibrated or poorly calibrated vehicle. And, you know, there are safety and liability concerns that if you're not calibrating the, you know, the vehicles properly, if your body shops are giving them to vendors that are not doing it properly, right, that could be a liability concern that could come back to the body shop, right? So just again, something to think about. So with that, that's all I have. So hopefully it was some good information there for you guys. Again, keep an eye on the white paper that we have coming out. So thanks so much for giving me the time.
That's excellent. We did a couple questions come in, so let me cover those. Well, first, I want to thank you very much. I think it was a very good presentation, because anytime I'm informed and I start sweating, it means, because I'm nervous, that means you hit some pretty good points.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one question that came up real early was when you mentioned about data below 35 miles an hour and above 35. The question was, and I think as I, you know, under 35, I think a lot of people recognize. Is there any data that shows an improvement on over 35 miles an hour?
There's no, well, at least that I have looked into, that AAA study from 2024 shows that above 35, you start seeing actual degradation, right, in performance. And then above 45, almost no performance, which is interesting, because when you see the average cost of a repair, I think a few years ago, and again, I'm going anecdotally here without, you know, but some of you would agree, it was something like the average was something like 2,000, and then now it's about 5,000. And that's because if you correlate that data, you know, with that study, shows that lower speeds, which would have been the $2,000 repairs, are now being stopped by ADAS. But then the higher speeds, you have a higher impact and more things to repair, causing a more expensive repair. So I think it's funny to kind of correlate those two. But no, I don't see any data, George, that specifically says that it's getting better at above 35 so far.
Good answer. Thank you. I got a few other questions. One that came up was in regards when you went through the process with the vehicle, you know, the baseline vehicle. And the question, I think this is a good one. Do you have any sense of what the vehicle history was with that car?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we looked into that, right? We checked that was still the original glass. We checked the crash history. There was nothing there that told us that there had been any kind of repair done to it that could have somehow done any kind of misalignment to to the system. So we've done that check now. If there was something there outside of what was in the available system for us to check that, then we would never know. But at least we did all the due diligence that we could with the systems that we had available.
Cool. One thing, from a claim perspective, I saw a video recently where a person had made a lane change and hit a car that occupied the lane that they were changing into. And it was a video that had the officer there, and the driver kept saying, "I didn't get any warning, so it's not my fault." And the officer said, "You changed directions from a straight line and you moved into a lane that was occupied. So that is your fault." No,
Right.
no. I did not get any indication. And I think there's a lot of that out there. So I don't know why I said that, other than I just thought that was interesting. Here's the other one is, can I ask you a question about in-house and outsourcing?
Yeah.
Every time I talk to someone in ADAS, I always like to ask this question to get a sense. And it just comes from being around too long, back in the days where, alignments and AC recharge and, frame and things were outsourced on a regular basis. And then, of course, we all figured out if I can keep it in-house, I can go quicker, faster, easier, and get it done. And so I'm going to ask you, I don't know if you know the split or what's happening. So I'd like a comment about in-house versus outsourcing. And then the other thing I saw was, and I experienced some of this, where we're going to do our own alignments. Yeah, that's right, we're going to. And then at the end of the day, you go, I don't want to do this anymore. This is more complicated than I thought it was. I bought a big machine. I thought this would be good. I'd rather just outsource it. Any comments about in-house and outsourcing?
Yeah, I don't have any data, George, to actually give you that, but it's some anecdotal, information that I've gotten over the past few months is that it depends, right? Like you're saying about the alignment, the pendulum swings from time to time. And I think as, the industry is slowing down a little bit, people are taking buyouts from the insurance companies, shops can see that as a new revenue source and try to bring it in-house, right? That's one way to think about it. Because then if you're doing it in-house, you get to, keep most of the revenue, right? But on the other hand, we also hear that, the techs and mechanics, they should be working on collision stuff necessarily, right? So whenever you bring something like that, it might, occupy a full bay. That bay, there's an opportunity cost there, right? So some really rather outsource that, not just because of the complexity, because of the liability concerns if they do it themselves and do it incorrectly, right? They outsource it to other companies to, again, properly use their resources to what they're really good at. And then, of course, not have this concern about the liability as much as doing it in-house. So I kind of see it both ways, where some shops are trying to generate more revenue by doing it, and others are trying to, again, utilize their resources properly with, the know-how that they have currently.
That was good. Good. Thank you. I appreciate that. The other thing that popped up here was, when you introduced yourself, you obviously, have a global view, it looks like. I spoke at IBIS and I've been to IBIS a few times, and I remember sitting there and I'd listen to each one of the countries, talk about what they're doing. And one country would get up and I'd be in the audience going, God, are you guys behind? And I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And then another country comes up and I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm behind. Do you have a sense of where ADAS is globally? I don't even know if, I think it's a good question, but it may not be. It just globally, do you have a sense that everybody else isn't fine, or they're not even touching it, or where do we fall? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, no, we're behind. As when it comes to regulation, right? I think a lot of people can probably attest to this, right? We're not a very regulation happy country, right? A lot of people don't like the government getting into it. Where Europe, for example, in Asia, Japan specifically, in Korea, they're much more open to have some kind of regulation, right? So I've seen proposals from, Korea and Europeans that they're going to do these, kind of like the emissions test that some states have. They're going to do an ADAS test where you have to bring in a vehicle once or a year or once 3 years to verify to see if your system is working. And if it's not, go calibrate it, right? So I think that ours is very state dependent. I think that federal ones, the FMVSS 27 is really the closest thing that I've seen to at least enable the technology, but then nothing on the back end for service and aftermarket, right? So, yeah, I think comparatively we are behind when it comes to regulation, be that good or bad, right? Because again, everybody's going to have a different opinion on that. But when you look at Euro, they have a lot more mandates on the technology. They have more initiatives on verifying if the technology is working correctly, ensuring that things over the years are working correctly, right? So I think they're a little bit ahead.
One of the things of course, Jordan, I don't know if she's in or out, but one of the questions she asks from the body shop standpoint, and I hear a lot, and I support this kind of question, is that you got people on here, that are going Mach 5 with their hair on fire, right? They got from a collision repair standpoint, and they've got, I mean, there's so many things that they've got to focus on, and it's tough to have an appetite or the ability, which way's the wind sock blowing today, and to put 100% of your effort into one thing is very difficult. So one of the things that Jordan asked, and I think it's a good question, is, you sit here and watch this, and it was very good. I really appreciate that information. But if you were a repair facility out there and they're going, okay, I get it, I see it, I'm nervous, I understand, but I don't know what to do first. Or what is it? Do you have any recommendations on the repairer side? And I'm going to ask you the same question about insurer. Is there anything, and maybe there isn't, but if there's anything that, what, I'm not buying or selling here, but this is an ADAS. Here's probably the first thing you need to be, it needs attention. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's education, right, or the lack thereof, right? So I think as a collision center, a body shop, or whatever, if you're touching ADAS, right, I think the number one thing is making sure that there are tons of resources online about from iCar and others, right, that you can learn about what ADAS is, right? And I think having that basic understanding of the camera is doing this, the radar is doing this, and then if you have any kind of disruption in the collision to this, I need to recalibrate, right? There are several systems out there, right? Opus, Rev, ADAS Think, all of those, right, that can help shops with technology identify when something needs to be calibrated, right? Because if I'm a shop owner and I don't understand what's going on, at the very least, I need to get myself out of this liability problem, which is, again, I just need to identify. And then once you identify and you start learning and everybody in your shop has the understanding, then you can start looking into, okay, I know company A, company B, they do a good job, or, they follow, here's the reports, all of this, right? They follow the OEM guidelines. It's the education part of taking time to get, the people that are involved, estimators, or even the technicians themselves, right, to understand the underlying technology, and then leveraging other technology, or this when to calibrate. I think it's a very important for them to do. So that's where I would start. There's a lot of resources online. It's something that ourselves we have a little web page within our company, right, that talks about some FAQs and some of the things that need to be done. We're boosting that up with more of the regular what's ADAS, the do's and don'ts, right? So all of that's coming. So I think that's one place. I'm sure companies like AirPro and others have similar resources as well. So it's really just doing some research there, because unfortunately, yeah, there isn't a central place for you to get that information. But there is information out there, and I think everybody needs to get educated in.
Yeah.
George, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. I need finding the time. Okay, here's the tough one. Okay, from an insurance standpoint, I'm the old insurance guy. So, and we got to be careful, because you can't slip into cost and paying and all those kind of things. I got a hard enough time keeping my job without doing something like that. But And again, if you only want to comment or if there's nothing pops to mind, that's fine. But, if you were talking to like an insurance adjuster or management and say, hey, I got to tell you, if I was an insurance company, the first thing I would pay attention to is blank. Is there anything like that? I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, you don't have to do anything.
No, I think it's a fair question. They're a big stakeholder in this whole ecosystem, right? Um, they are the ones approving the claims. They're the ones paying for it, right? So the biggest thing for me, and we talk to insurance companies a lot, right? We're very involved in keeping them abreast of what's going on, and the same things that go for a body shop go for an insurance company, which is adjusters and people on the field. They need to understand what ADAS is. They need to know that when something happens to a bumper or something happens, you replace glass, they need to know it triggers a calibration, because from their side, right? If I'm in their shoes, I don't want to pay for things that I don't need to, right? And I also don't want to miss something that I need to do, because then there might be liability issues, right? So in their shoes, it's really the same kind of education and leveraging some of the same tools or same, education that allows them to understand and really disseminate that learning to their adjusters and people in the field, so they are capable of making calls. And because I think, I'm not saying this happens a lot, but sometimes, not shops, but calibration providers, they will say, oh, you need to calibrate this, and you don't necessarily need it, or you miss something, right? So I think that happens, and I don't think it's more bad intent, it's more of a lack of awareness, right? And then again, for them to get smart with this, it's smart for them, because then they would be paying for exactly what they need and ensuring vehicles are getting put back on the road, with functioning systems, which for them, again, it's good because it prevents accidents, and then it's less claims and less money, right? So all of that snowballs into they need to understand that in a better way and get more involved.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for tackling that one. That was pretty good. A shout out to the insurance side. And it works both ways. You sit in insurance, an adjuster's desk, and it's just a different animal. Hundreds of shops are coming at with 100 different things. And of course, shout out to the repairers that are going, look, I know haven't decided what you want to do, but I do have this car here right now, and I have to fix it right now. So they have some done. So with that, I don't have any other questions.
I have one, George.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Brunno, you had, you talked about the other countries and, actually having laws that said, we need to test a vehicle every so often. As a consumer, which is really where my question's coming from, is, I've got a 2021 Expedition, and it's doing really well. And it's got a lot of a lot of the features on it, parking, forward facing cameras, and all the, rear facing. But over the year, when I take my car in and he says, you need to get some new tires, you need, there's all these maintenance items. I always wondered, what happened to my, do I need maintenance? You're the first one that I've seen make a presentation where that said, or even mentioned ADAS as a maintenance item. Okay. And I think that's, and I think that's kind of important, because I see that things wear out, but it's a hidden thing. I mean, literally, we don't know until you test it out,
Right.
and occasionally my sensors work a little differently. I pull into the garage, okay, and one time the side cameras, the side radar and so forth doesn't detect the wall, and at other times it detects the wall. So can you talk about, ADAS as a maintenance item?
Yeah, again, from the presentation, right? There's a data point that points to the fact that we need to look into this, right? I think that there is normal wear and tear of the vehicle, big potholes that you go through. God, in Michigan here we have a lot, right? And it's just one of the things that I think these other countries that you mentioned, right? They are starting to make that at least let's go test it every once or 3 years, right, depending on the country. And I think that's important because they start to see what I saw with this data point. There's some other studies, right, from TUV that talks about how wear and tear of the vehicle does impact the performance of the sensors. It's dependent on OEMs. Some OEMs have good self-learnings, others don't, right? It's really a mixed bag, Fred, that it's hard for me to definitively say, yeah, we need to do it. I think we need to go look into it more. I think that there is some already data points, not only from this study that we did, but others that are out there that we reference on our white paper, for example, that say that, yeah, this is something that is happening. So we're not the only ones saying this. It's something that I think others recognize. And yeah, I'd love to see more data that's statistically relevant that actually supports that. But I think, you know, to guarantee safety on the roads, this could be something that we need to do.
All right, Bruno, we're coming up on the top of the hour. We had 3 questions come in. We call that the speed round.
Yeah.
What we're going to do, we're not going to do our wrap up. We're going to use this couple minutes. So hang in, everybody. We got 3 questions. One of them, I don't know if you can answer, but I think there's a couple of good ones in here. So we're going to keep the answers short, and your answers have been awesome, but I just want to let you know in the spirit of time, we're going to move. So here's one question. So a shop identifies calibration's needed. They sublet it. They outsource it. How do they know if when they get it back, is it done? Yeah, it's done. So it's done. Everything's good. Yeah, it's done. How do they know that?
Report. You got to look at the report.
Okay, that's good. You're doing great. 2 more questions. You've got 1 point. If the vehicle, this is the one I think is tough because I think it's going to depend. If a vehicle,
George, 1 second, right? That report, it can't just be done, right? It needs to show like it was done. Here was the location. Here's what we did. Here's blah, 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 right? It's a detailed report that makes you feel comfortable that it was done correct.
Okay.
It's not just a pass fail.
Yeah, good point. Just like, alignment pass fail until you start looking at the report. I get it. Okay. A vehicle has a front mounted radar and it's on the radiator support, not the front bumper. And you replace the bumper. Is calibration still necessary, even though that sensor is sitting behind the bumper on the core support?
Depends. You got to read the OEM calibrating procedure. Some of them say, if you ever replace it, recalibrate. Others, not so much, right? So the answer is it depends, but the answer lies in the calibrating procedure. And then again, knowing that your calibration shop knows these procedures very well.
Okay, that one's the tough one. I agree. The last one was real quick, and this one's a little tough, but what do shops do in these little gray areas, right? And we went around this with steering columns and a few other. The vehicle is in a collision, and then of course the argument that a shopping cart's a collision and blah blah blah. Any thoughts about? And we'll close it out here with just a couple minutes. What do you do with the gray areas where it's that isn't as clear?
Yeah, I think again, the calibrating procedures, a lot of them have, I think it's Honda, for example, if there was any damage or around 300 millimeters from the radar, you need to recalibrate, right? So some of them do have that level of specificity, but others, it's anything that, could have impacted the structure and the location of it, swapping housings in front of, like a glass in front of the camera, the bumper in front. A lot of these, because they're not going to be placed exactly in the same location. If you call that a gray area, say to be safe, you have to calibrate and then try to point it to calibrating procedure that talks about a line item that says, if this was changed, and then you can say, extrapolate, say that we think that was the case. And then there's real backup information as to why you calibrated.
Very good. Thank you, Bruno. We're right on time. I want to thank you very much. I'm going to give a shout out in case Jordan's connected. If you want to say anything, that's fine. If not, I'll turn it back over to Fred. But I do want to thank you. I want to thank AirPro. This is why you go to TechTalk360 because it's a good thing. And Fred does a great job putting that together. And I'm glad to be part of it. I miss my partner. I miss Jordan.
Yeah,
Jordan and I don't always agree, but I respect her a lot, and she has a good sense of the industry. So Fred, I'll turn it back over to you. Maybe cover the next call, and
sure,
I'll let it go. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you, Bruno, and you, George, and Jordan, wherever you are. And just mark your calendars. We're going to have an exciting new one for Tech Talk 360 on August 20th. So we'll mark your calendars and we'll see you then. Take care, everyone. Have a
Yeah.
great week and be safe.